For 8 years, the boy couldn't walk. Every orthopedic surgeon said the same thing: congenital, irreversible. His father spent hundreds of millions, threatened specialists across 3 continents, demanded they look again. They all refused. Then a maid noticed something no one else did: a tiny scar, a hidden flinch, and what she did to that mafia boss's son in a single desperate moment will shock you. Ransom Kane was a mafia boss, the kind of name that made nations tremble. He controlled empires, moved billions in blood money, owned judges and senators. But his son Marco was born crippled. 8 years old, never took a single step. Ransom tried everything: Vienna, Boston, Singapore. Neurologists who cost more per consultation than most people earn in a year. They ran scans, performed procedures, recommended experimental surgeries. All of them said the same thing: birth trauma, permanent nerve damage. Accept it. Before we dive in, I pray that everyone who watches this video, subscribes, and leaves a comment will receive the very thing their heart has been searching for, whether it's peace, clarity, healing, or a breakthrough they've been waiting on. May unexpected blessings find you, may your silent prayers be answered, and may goodness follow you wherever you go. Let's begin. But Ransom couldn't accept it, because Marco was all he had left. His wife abandoned them both the day she saw the wheelchair, unable to handle the shame of a crippled heir in a criminal dynasty. So Ransom kept searching, kept spending, kept threatening God himself for an answer. What he didn't know, the answer wasn't coming from a sterile operating room. It was coming from the woman he'd just hired to clean the blood off his Persian rugs. Willow Maid was a maid. 24. No medical degree, no credentials, just a village girl trying to keep her dying father's hospital bills paid. She took the job knowing what it meant, working for a man whose business was built on violence, whose home had seen more blood than most emergency rooms. But she noticed something about Marco that every 6-figure specialist had missed. Something in the way he flinched, something about that tiny, almost invisible scar near his spine. Something dark, something wrong, something fixable. And one evening, while Ransom was away on business, the kind of business that ends with bodies and silence, she made a decision that would either save that boy's life or end her own in the most brutal way imaginable. What happened next? I need you to see it for yourself. But before we continue, hit subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I believe this story found you today for a reason. The Kane estate sprawled across a private hilltop overlooking the city. From the outside, it looked like power made physical. Iron gates, security cameras on every corner, gardens maintained by a team of 12, marble fountains, imported statues, windows that reflected the sun like shields. But inside, fear. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that announces itself with shouting or violence. This fear was quiet, controlled, the kind that lives in held breath and careful footsteps. Servants moved through the hallways like ghosts. Their movements were precise, practiced. They'd learned quickly. In Ransom Kane's house, you didn't make noise unless you wanted to be noticed, and being noticed was never good. The drawing room where Marco spent most of his days was the brightest room in the mansion, sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows. Expensive Persian rugs covered Italian marble floors. A grand piano sat in the corner, untouched for years. And in the center of all that opulence, a small boy in a wheelchair, arranging chess pieces with careful, lonely fingers. This was where Ransom Kane's empire crumbled every single day. This was where all his power meant nothing. This was where a mafia boss became just a father, helpless and drowning in guilt he couldn't kill or buy his way out of. And this was where Willow Maid first saw the truth that would change everything. It started with a chess piece. Marco had dropped his black knight, and it rolled under the mahogany side table. Willow was dusting nearby when she saw his small face contort in frustration, his hands gripping the wheelchair armrests as he stared at the unreachable piece. She picked it up, but instead of just handing it back, she placed it on the board and made a move. A simple opening gambit her father had taught her years ago. Marco's eyes went wide. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not the polite, empty smile he gave doctors and therapists, a real one. After that, everything changed. When Willow cleaned the drawing room, Marco would leave small things for her to find. A folded paper crane he'd made from his therapy notes, a piece of hard candy wrapped in gold foil, stolen from his father's desk. She'd respond by leaving him things too. A smooth river stone from her village, a pressed flower tucked between the pages of his chess book. They developed their own silent vocabulary, a language built on tiny gestures that no one else would notice. A tap on the left armrest meant he wanted her to stay longer. 2 taps meant his father was in a dark mood. 3 meant he was scared. But the most important gesture came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Willow had been arranging fresh linens when Marco rolled himself close to her, his small hand reaching out to touch her wrist. Then he pressed his palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. Safe. He was telling her she was safe. Or maybe that he felt safe with her. Either way, the gesture became their secret anchor. Whenever the mansion felt too oppressive, too cold, too full of the kind of silence that suffocates, Marco would press his palm to his chest and Willow would do the same. But while their bond grew, so did Willow's obsession with the scar. She saw it every time she helped Marco transfer from his wheelchair to the sofa for physical therapy. That tiny, almost invisible mark near the base of his spine, just above the coccyx, and that flinch, that involuntary shudder whenever pressure touched his lower back. It wasn't random. It was consistent, specific, anatomically precise. At night, in her small attic room, she'd sketch the location from memory, mentally tracing the path of nerves her grandmother had taught her about during those long village summers. The sciatic nerve, the pressure points, the ancient technique for releasing trapped energy, blocked pathways, compressed tissues. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. Sometimes the body knows how to heal itself. It just needs someone brave enough to listen and wise enough to help. She started watching Marco differently, cataloging every detail. The way his right leg hung slightly more twisted than the left. The way he'd unconsciously reach for his lower back during moments of stress. The way his face would pale when storms came, atmospheric pressure changes triggering something deeper. She was so lost in her observations that she didn't notice Mrs. Chen until the head of security's shadow fell across her. "Miss Maeve, a word." Mrs. Chen was a small woman with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that had seen too many bodies disposed of to waste sympathy on naive maids. She'd worked for Ransom Kane for 15 years, managing his household with the same cold efficiency he used to manage his empire. She gestured sharply toward the corridor, and Willow followed, her heart already sinking. They stopped in an alcove away from the cameras, away from witnesses. Mrs. Chen's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut like a knife. "I've been watching you, getting close to the boy, touching him, observing him. That stops today. Staff doesn't get close to Marco. We've had 37 people work this house in 8 years. 23 of them thought they could be special. Thought they could be the one to fix what can't be fixed. They're all gone now." Mrs. Chen stepped closer, her perfume suffocating in the narrow space. "You're here to clean floors, Miss Maeve, scrub toilets, polish silver. You are not here to play doctor. You are not here to experiment on a disabled child. You are especially not here to give Mr. Kane false hope." Willow's throat tightened. "I would never hurt Marco. Your intentions don't matter. Your actions do. And if I see you cross that line again, you won't just lose this job. Mr. Kane doesn't fire people the way normal employers do. He makes examples. And your father's hospital bills? They'll bury him 6 months early." Mrs. Chen's smile was thin, final. "Do we understand each other?" Willow nodded, unable to speak. Mrs. Chen walked away without another word, her footsteps silent on the marble floor. That night, Marco left a folded paper bird on Willow's cleaning cart. Inside, written in his careful child's handwriting, was a single word: stay. But Willow knew the terrible truth. Staying meant watching him suffer. Leaving meant abandoning the only person who'd ever made her feel like she mattered, and helping him, really helping him, meant risking everything, including her father's life. She pressed her palm against her chest. Safe. But for how much longer? Dr. Heinrich Volker flew in from Zurich on a Tuesday. He was the 9th specialist this year, a man with 3 decades of experience and a reputation for performing miracles on oligarchs' children. He spent 4 hours examining Marco, reviewing scans that cost more than most people's houses, consulting with his team via encrypted video calls. When he finally emerged from the examination room, his face said everything. Willow was polishing the hallway mirror when she heard it. The crash. Then Ransom's voice, low and lethal. "Say it again." Dr. Volker's accent was thick, nervous. "Mr. Kane, I understand your frustration, but the imaging is conclusive. Congenital nerve damage, diffuse and—" The second crash was louder, glass shattering. Willow's hands froze on the mirror. Through the crack in the door, she could see Ransom standing over the remains of a Venetian vase, his tattooed knuckles bleeding, his chest heaving. 2 of his men stood perfectly still in the corners, faces blank, hands ready. "I flew you here on my plane. I paid you $50,000 to look at my son for 4 hours, and you're telling me the same thing every other coward with a medical degree has told me? Mr. Kane, I wish I could—" "You wish." Ransom's laugh was empty, broken. "I don't pay for wishes. I pay for results. Get out. Get out before I forget you're not the problem." Dr. Volker left so quickly he forgot his briefcase. Ransom stood there in the ruined office, breathing hard, staring at his bleeding hands like they belonged to someone else. Then he looked up and saw Marco's wheelchair through the doorway, saw his son pretending to read a book, pretending he hadn't heard his father's rage echo through the mansion again. Ransom's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more terrifying than the shouting. "There has to be someone, somewhere, someone who can fix this." But Willow, watching from the shadows, knew the truth he couldn't accept. All the money in the world, all the power, all the threats, none of it mattered when you were asking the wrong question. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her attic room, staring at the sketch she'd drawn of Marco's spine, the scar, the nerve pathways. Her grandmother's voice kept circling through her mind. Words spoken on a porch in the village 10 years ago while they ground herbs in a stone mortar. "God uses the willing, child. He doesn't need the qualified or the credentialed. He equips the called." Willow had been 14, watching her grandmother treat a farmer whose leg had been crushed by a tractor. The doctor said he'd never walk without a cane. But her grandmother had seen something different, had used a technique so old it didn't have a name in English, only in the mountain dialect. 3 weeks later, the farmer was working his fields again. Willow sat up, her decision crystallizing with painful clarity. Doing nothing meant watching Marco suffer, meant watching Ransom's rage eat him alive, meant watching that beautiful, lonely boy grow up in a wheelchair when his body was screaming that something was wrong, something fixable, something simple. But doing something meant risking everything. She thought of her father in that hospital bed, his breathing assisted by machines she couldn't afford. She thought of Mrs. Chen's warning. She thought of Ransom Kane's reputation. The rumors whispered by other staff about people who'd crossed him, people who'd made mistakes, people who'd disappeared. Then she thought of Marco's hand pressing against his chest. Safe. The decision was made. Over the next 3 days, Willow prepared in secret. She had the acupuncture needles her grandmother had given her years ago, thin as hair, kept in a sandalwood box. She sterilized them with rubbing alcohol stolen from the medical supply closet, boiling them twice in her small electric kettle. The anesthetic balm was harder. She had to crush willow bark and mix it with arnica oil, preparing it in tiny batches and hiding it in an empty lotion jar. She studied Marco's schedule, memorized the guards' rotations, noted when Ransom had business trips planned. She practiced the pressure point technique on herself, finding the exact angle, the precise depth, the moment of release. Her hands shook every time. This wasn't medicine. This was treason in a house built on blood. But every time doubt crept in, she'd see Marco in that drawing room, arranging his chess pieces with lonely fingers, his small body rigid with pain he'd learned to hide so his father wouldn't rage at another doctor. On Friday, Ransom left for a meeting in Boston. His men said he'd be gone overnight, maybe longer if the deal went south. Mrs. Chen was visiting her sister in the city. The mansion was quieter than usual, the staff moving like ghosts. Willow cleaned the drawing room that evening, the sandalwood box hidden in her apron pocket, the balm tucked inside her sleeve. Marco was at his usual spot by the window, watching the storm clouds gather over the hills. He turned his wheelchair toward her and pressed his palm against his chest. Safe. Willow pressed hers back and prayed to her grandmother's God that she wasn't about to destroy them both. The storm hit at 7. Thunder rolled across the hills like distant artillery, and the temperature dropped 15 degrees in an hour. Willow was folding linens in the west corridor when her phone buzzed. A text from one of Ransom's drivers, sent to all household staff. Boss delayed, Boston situation complicated, don't expect him until tomorrow afternoon. The mansion felt different when Ransom was gone. The fear didn't disappear, it just changed shape, became something waiting instead of something present. Most of the guards were positioned at the perimeter. Inside, only 2 remained, both stationed at the main entrance. Mrs. Chen was still in the city. The other staff had retreated to their quarters early, nobody wanting to be visible when the master of the house was in a dangerous mood, even from 200 miles away. Willow finished her tasks mechanically, her mind elsewhere. The sandalwood box felt like it was burning through her apron pocket. She kept touching it, feeling the smooth wood, reminding herself why she'd made this choice. Marco was probably in the drawing room. He always was on storm nights, watching lightning fracture the sky, counting seconds between thunder and flash like other children counted sheep. She was walking past the drawing room when she heard it. Not loud, barely a sound at all. A muffled thump, like something soft hitting carpet, followed by a choked-off whimper. Willow's blood went cold. She pushed the door open. The room was dark except for the dim glow of a single lamp and the occasional flash of lightning through the windows. Marco's wheelchair was tipped slightly to one side, and he was slumped forward in it, his small body rigid and trembling. His hands gripped the armrests so hard his knuckles were white, bloodless. His face was contorted in silent agony, tears streaming down his cheeks. His teeth clenched so tight she could see the muscles working in his jaw. He was trying not to scream. "Marco!" Willow dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering, afraid to touch him and make it worse. "Marco, look at me." His eyes found hers, wild with pain, and he shook his head frantically. He couldn't speak, could barely breathe. His whole body was locked in a spasm, every muscle rigid. Willow's training kicked in before her fear could stop her. She'd seen this before years ago, when a village boy had fallen from a roof and compressed a nerve in his back. The body trying to protect itself, muscles seizing around the injury, making everything worse. She gently touched Marco's lower back through his shirt, and he jerked violently, a strangled cry escaping his throat. The area was hot, swollen, the tissue inflamed and angry. The atmospheric pressure from the storm had triggered something, pushed whatever was compressing that nerve into a critical position. This was it. The moment her grandmother had tried to prepare her for. The moment when you either act or watch someone suffer because you're too afraid to trust yourself. Willow moved so Marco could see her face clearly. She pressed her palm to her chest. Safe. Then placed her hand over her heart and made a cross with her fingers, a gesture Marco had seen her do before when she prayed. Then she held up her hands, showing him they were empty, and slowly shook her head while pointing at him. "I would never hurt you. Never." Marco's breathing was ragged, desperate, but his eyes locked onto hers with something that broke her heart and gave her courage at the same time. Trust. Absolute, complete trust. The kind he'd never given those specialists in their white coats with their expensive equipment and confident diagnoses. The kind that said he knew she saw him, really saw him, in a way no one else ever had. He nodded once, a tiny movement, and leaned his head forward against her shoulder. Willow's hands were shaking as she carefully lifted the back of his shirt. The scar was there, that almost invisible mark, but now the area around it was visibly swollen, the skin hot and inflamed. The pressure point was acute, critical. If she did nothing, this agony could last hours, maybe days. The nerve was being crushed, screaming, killing him inch by inch. But if she acted, if she used the needle, if she released the pressure, she was either saving his life or signing both their death warrants. Lightning flashed. Thunder followed 3 seconds later. The storm was right on top of them. Marco whimpered against her shoulder, his small hands clutching her arms. Willow reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the sandalwood box. Her grandmother's voice whispered through the thunder, "God equips the called." She opened the box. Willow's hands steadied the moment she made the decision. Years of watching her grandmother work, of grinding herbs and learning pressure points by candlelight, all condensed into this single moment. She positioned Marco carefully, helping him lean forward against the wheelchair's armrest so his lower back was exposed. His breathing came in short, desperate gasps. "Stay with me," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to Marco or herself. She opened the small jar of balm, the willow bark and arnica mixture her grandmother had sworn by. The scent was sharp, medicinal. She applied it gently to the swollen area, her fingers finding the exact point where the scar tissue met inflamed muscle. Marco flinched but didn't pull away. The balm would numb the surface, but what came next would hurt regardless. Willow pulled out the needle. Thin as a hair, sterilized 3 times, it caught the lamplight for just a second. She said a prayer she'd learned as a child, words in her grandmother's mountain dialect that roughly translated to, "Guide my hand, steady my heart." Then she found the point. The exact minute location where compressed tissue met trapped nerve. The place where 8 years of agony had built a prison around Marco's body. She pressed the needle in, angled precisely, deeper than surface level, finding the resistance point and pushing through. Marco screamed. Not a child's cry, not a whimper. A guttural, primal sound of pain that seemed to tear itself from somewhere deep in his chest. His body went rigid. Every muscle locked, and for one horrible second Willow thought she'd made a catastrophic mistake, that she'd severed something vital, that she'd killed him. Then the pressure released. It was like watching a dam break. Marco's entire body convulsed, his back arching, and suddenly, impossibly, his right leg kicked out violently, slamming against the wheelchair's footrest. Then his left, both legs moving, jerking, alive with sensation they hadn't felt in 8 years. "It burns!" Marco's voice cracked, disbelieving and terrified and ecstatic all at once. "It burns! I can feel it! I can feel my legs!" His legs kicked again, uncontrolled movements as nerves fired signals they'd forgotten how to send. His feet flexed, toes curling and uncurling. He looked down at his own body like it belonged to a stranger, like he was witnessing a resurrection. Willow caught his legs, tears streaming down her face, laughing and sobbing at the same time. "Yes, yes, that's real, Marco, that's real, you're feeling it, you're—" The door exploded inward. Ransom Kane stood in the doorway, drenched in rain, his suit jacket torn at the shoulder, blood, someone else's, spattered across his white shirt. His tattooed neck glistened with water, his face a mask of exhaustion and rage from whatever had happened in Boston. His eyes scanned the room in one practiced sweep, his son slumped forward in the wheelchair, the maid kneeling at his feet with her hands on his bare legs, Marco's face twisted in pain, and something small and metallic glinting on the floor beside them. For one frozen moment, nobody moved. Thunder crashed directly overhead. Then Ransom saw Marco's legs, saw them moving, twitching, flexing. Saw his son's feet doing something they'd never done before. But his brain couldn't process miracle. It only processed threat. "What have you done to my son?" The words came out like a roar, like something tearing free from a wounded animal. Ransom crossed the room in 3 strides, his hand already reaching for the gun holstered at his back. His face contorted with murderous rage, every tattoo seeming to darken with his fury, rain dripping from his hair onto the Persian rug. "Dad, wait!" Marco's voice was weak, shocked, but Ransom wasn't hearing it. He grabbed Willow by the arm and yanked her away from Marco with enough force to send her sprawling backward. She hit the floor hard, gasping, just as two of Ransom's men appeared in the doorway, drawn by their boss's voice. "Get her up!" Ransom snarled, not taking his eyes off Marco. Searching his son's face for signs of harm, his hands hovering over the boy like he was afraid to touch him. "Get her up and take her to the security room, now!" "Mr. Kane, please, I can explain." Willow's voice cracked. "You touched my son." Ransom's voice was deadly quiet now, which was somehow worse than the shouting. He finally looked at her, and the emptiness in his eyes was more terrifying than rage. "You put your hands on my disabled child while I was gone. You did something to him. He's in pain. He's crying." "Dad, my legs." Marco tried again, his voice desperate. But Ransom was already turning away, already pulling out his phone to call his private medical team, already ordering his men to secure Willow before she could run. The two guards hauled her to her feet, their grips bruising her arms. Willow looked back at Marco one last time as they dragged her toward the door. He was staring at his own legs in wonder and terror, his small hands gripping the armrests, and she could see him trying to make them move again, trying to prove to his father that something impossible had just happened. But Ransom Kane only saw a threat eliminated and his son in distress. He didn't see the miracle. Not yet. The security room was in the basement, 3 floors below the mansion's polished marble and crystal chandeliers. Concrete walls, soundproofing foam, a single metal chair bolted to the floor, and a drain in the corner that Willow tried very hard not to think about. They'd taken her apron, her phone, even her shoes. The guards had been professional, silent, their faces carefully blank as they locked her inside. She sat on the cold floor, back against the wall, and waited. An hour passed, maybe 2. Time moved strangely in windowless rooms. Then the door opened and Mrs. Chen walked in, followed by a man Willow had only seen from a distance, Viktor Kozlov, Ransom's head of security. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, and never learned to smile. Mrs. Chen's expression was almost sympathetic. Almost. "You were warned, Miss Maeve." Victor closed the door behind them. The sound of the lock engaging echoed like a gunshot. He didn't sit. Just stood there, arms crossed, studying Willow like she was a problem that needed solving. "What did you do to the boy?" His accent was thick, Eastern European, each word carefully measured. Willow met his eyes. "I helped him. He can feel his legs now." For the first time in 8 years, Marco can feel his legs. Victor's expression didn't change. "You put a needle in his spine. A pressure point, to release a compressed nerve. My grandmother taught me." "Your grandmother." Victor laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Mr. Kane spent $300 million on specialists. Doctors from Vienna, Boston, Singapore. And you think your village grandmother knows better?" "She did." Willow's voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking. "Because she taught me to look at the patient, not the scans." Marco's paralysis wasn't congenital, it was mechanical. A small lesion putting pressure on the sciatic nerve. If you just let the doctors examine him properly now, they'll see... "See what? That a maid with no medical training experimented on a disabled child?" Mrs. Chen's voice was sharp. "Do you understand what you've done? Not just to yourself, but to your father?" The threat landed like a physical blow. Willow's breath caught. Victor pulled out his phone, typed something, then showed her the screen. It was a photo of her father's hospital room, taken from the doorway. Recent, maybe minutes ago. "Mr. Kane is a thorough man. He protects what's his. And right now, he believes you tried to hurt his son." "I didn't." "What you believe doesn't matter." Victor pocketed the phone. "What Mr. Kane believes is all that matters, and until the doctors tell him otherwise, you stay here." They left without another word. The lock engaged again. Willow pressed her palms against her eyes and prayed. Upstairs, the mansion had transformed into controlled chaos. Ransom's private medical team arrived within 20 minutes. Dr. Elena Vasquez and 3 specialists who'd been on retainer for years. They'd converted one of the guest suites into a temporary examination room. Equipment wheeled in on carts, monitors beeping to life. Marco sat on the edge of the bed, his legs dangling over the side. Dangling, moving. He kept flexing his feet, watching his toes curl and uncurl with the fascination of someone witnessing magic. "Dad, look!" His voice was breathless, excited. "Look what I can do." But Ransom wasn't watching his son's feet. He was watching Dr. Vasquez's face as she reviewed the initial nerve conduction tests, her expression carefully neutral. "Well?" Ransom's voice was hoarse from shouting. Dr. Vasquez looked up, and for just a moment, Willow would have recognized the fear in her eyes. The fear of a doctor who'd made millions off an ongoing treatment suddenly facing the possibility that the treatment had been unnecessary all along. "There's definitely electrical activity in the lower limbs," she said carefully. "But it could be a temporary spasm, a nerve response to trauma. We've seen cases where acute pain can trigger." "He's moving his feet, Elena." Ransom's voice was flat, dangerous. "I'm watching him move his feet. Feet that haven't moved in 8 years. I understand, but we need to run comprehensive tests before we draw any conclusions. Neural responses can be deceiving. The Maid may have triggered a temporary reaction, but that doesn't mean..." "How long?" "For the full workup? At least 12 hours. Maybe more." Ransom ran his hand over his face. Exhaustion and confusion warring with the rage that still simmered beneath his skin. He looked at Marco, really looked at him, and saw his son smiling. Actually smiling. Hopeful in a way Ransom hadn't seen since before the wheelchair. But he also remembered the Maid kneeling over Marco, remembered his son's scream of pain, remembered the needle glinting on the floor like evidence of an assault. He walked into the hallway where Victor was waiting. "The Maid?" "Secured, awaiting your orders." Ransom was quiet for a long moment, staring at nothing. Then, "Prepare a disposal team. Have them ready within the hour." Victor's face remained impassive. "And if the doctors confirm the boy's improvement?" "Then we'll know she got lucky." Ransom's jaw tightened. "But nobody touches my son and walks away. Lucky or not, make the arrangements." "Yes, sir." Back in the security room, Willow heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Multiple sets, heavy boots, the sound of equipment being moved. She pressed her palm against her chest, even though Marco couldn't see it. Safe. But she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. By dawn, Marco had done the impossible 3 more times. The physical therapist, a nervous woman named Sarah who'd worked with Marco for 6 years, had placed her hand beneath his right foot and asked him to push. Just push. A simple request that had always been met with apologetic silence and Marco's frustrated tears. This time, his foot pressed down against her palm. Sarah's hand trembled. "Again, Marco. Push again." He did. Harder this time, his whole leg engaging, muscles remembering a function they'd been denied. Then his left foot, then both together at as small movements, weak and uncoordinated, but undeniable. Real. Dr. Vasquez stood in the corner, her tablet clutched against her chest, watching her entire career crumble with each tiny flex of Marco's toes. She'd called the movements reflexive and possibly temporary in her initial report. But reflexes didn't improve over 6 hours. Reflexes didn't show progressive strength. This was recovery. Ransom had been awake for 32 hours straight. He sat in a chair beside Marco's bed, his expensive suit wrinkled and blood-stained from Boston, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and something darker. Every time Marco moved his legs, Ransom felt something crack inside his chest. Relief and rage and a creeping horror he didn't want to name. "Dr. Vasquez!" His voice cut through the room like a blade. "A word. Now." They stepped into the hallway. Ransom closed the door behind them, his movements controlled, precise. The kind of calm that preceded violence. 8 years, he said quietly. 8 years, I've brought my son to you. 8 years you've told me nothing could be done. And now a maid with no degree, no credentials, no million-dollar equipment, she does in one night what you couldn't do in 8 years. Dr. Vasquez's throat worked. Mr. Kane, we followed every protocol. The imaging showed diffuse nerve damage, congenital in nature. Then the imaging was wrong, or you were. Ransom stepped closer. I want every file, every scan, every report, every email, every notation from every doctor who's ever touched my son's case. All of it, in the next hour. Mr. Kane, that's thousands of pages. Then you'd better start pulling them now. Dr. Vasquez made the call with shaking hands. Within 40 minutes, 3 assistants arrived with laptops and external drives, setting up a workstation in a private conference room. Files began appearing on screens. Years of documentation, scans, treatment plans, billing records that ran into the tens of millions. Ransom sat at the head of the table, forcing his exhausted brain to focus, looking for the mistake. The missed detail, the one thing that would explain how a village girl had seen what Harvard-trained specialists had not. He assumed incompetence. He was looking for negligence. He found something far worse. The file was dated 3 years ago. A routine follow-up scan, ordered during one of Marco's quarterly evaluations. The imaging was standard, unremarkable, but attached to it was a consultation note from a young resident, Dr. Bisa James Chen, since transferred to a hospital in California. The note was brief, clinical. Follow-up MRI shows small fibrous lesion at L5-S1 junction, likely postnatal adhesion creating pressure on sciatic nerve root. Structure appears removable via minor surgical procedure. Estimated recovery time, 6 to 8 weeks. Recommend consultation with pediatric neurosurgery for lesion excision. Ransom read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. Removable. Minor surgical procedure. 6 to 8 weeks. His hands started shaking. Elena. His voice sounded strange, distant. What is this? Dr. Vasquez appeared at his shoulder, looked at the screen, and went pale. That's Dr. Chen's assessment. He was a first-year resident, very inexperienced. Inexperienced? Ransom's voice was still quiet. Too quiet. He found something removable. 3 years ago. 3 years, Elena. Mr. Kane, a resident's opinion isn't definitive. We would have reviewed. Did you? He turned to face her. Did you review this? The silence answered everything. Ransom pulled up the file properties. The document had been flagged and moved to a subfolder labeled Secondary Assessments, Non-Critical. Buried, hidden where no one would look unless they were searching for something specific. He opened the senior surgeon's notes from that same date. Dr. Richard Moss, Vasquez's predecessor, now retired in the Bahamas on a pension Ransom's payments had funded. The note was just one line. Case reassessed. Patient stable on current protocol. Continuing ongoing advanced treatment plan. No surgical intervention recommended at this time. The room tilted. Ransom gripped the edge of the table. Ongoing advanced treatment protocol. His voice cracked. That's what you called it. That's what you've been calling it for 8 years. He looked at Dr. Vasquez, and she actually stepped backward. You all knew there was something fixable, something simple, and you buried it. Mr. Kane, please understand, the assessment was preliminary. The risks of surgery in a child. Don't. The word came out like a gunshot. Don't you dare talk to me about risks. Not when you've been billing me $3 million a year for treatments you knew wouldn't work. Not when you kept my son in a wheelchair so you could keep collecting checks. Dr. Vasquez's face crumpled. It wasn't like that. The lesion was small, possibly inconsequential. We genuinely believed. You believed my money was unlimited. You believed I'd keep paying forever. And you were right. Ransom's laugh was broken, empty. I would have given you everything, every dollar, every asset, anything to fix my son, and you already knew how. He stood, the chair scraping backward, his hands curled into fists at his sides. "A maid," he whispered. "A maid with nothing saw what you refused to see. She risked her life, her father's life, everything, while you people sat in your offices and planned your retirements." He walked toward the door, his movements mechanical. "Mr. Kane, where are you going?" Ransom didn't answer. He was already thinking about the woman locked in his basement, the woman he'd ordered disposed of, the woman who'd saved his son while the people he'd trusted had kept him broken for profit. His world had shattered. And now he had to face what he'd almost done to the only person who'd told him the truth. Ransom drove himself back to the mansion. No driver, no security detail. Just him and the pre-dawn silence, and the weight of 3 years of buried truth sitting on his chest like a corpse. His phone had been ringing for an hour. Victor, Mrs. Chen, his lawyers, his business partners in Boston, still waiting for answers about deals that no longer mattered. He'd silenced it all. The empire that had taken 20 years to build felt like ash in his mouth. He'd built everything on power, on the belief that money could solve any problem, that fear could command any solution, that the right amount of pressure applied to the right people would bend reality itself. And all of it, every dollar, every threat, every carefully constructed piece of his world, had kept his son crippled, while a maid with rough hands and a grandmother's wisdom had set him free. The mansion was quiet when he arrived. The sky was beginning to lighten, that strange gray hour before sunrise when the world feels suspended between darkness and day. Ransom walked through his own home like a stranger, seeing it clearly for the first time. The opulence, the cold marble, the expensive art that meant nothing, a museum built by blood money to house a broken family. He took the stairs down to the basement. Each step felt heavier than the last. Victor was stationed outside the security room, alert despite the hour. He straightened when he saw Ransom approach. "Sir, the disposal team is ready. They're waiting for your—" "Send them home," Victor blinked. "Sir?" "Send them home." "Victor, dismiss the guards. All of them. I need the room empty. Now." For a moment, Victor looked like he might question the order. Then he saw something in Ransom's face, something broken and desperate and utterly unlike the man he'd worked for, and he nodded. He made 2 quick calls, spoke in low Russian, then gestured to the other guard. "You heard him. Clear out, both floors." They left without argument. Ransom waited until their footsteps faded, until he could hear nothing but the hum of the building's ventilation system and his own ragged breathing. Then he unlocked the door. Willow sat on the floor where he'd last seen her, back against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. She looked up when he entered, and there was no fear in her eyes, just a calm, sad acceptance, like she'd already made peace with whatever was coming. That look destroyed him. "Miss Maeve." His voice came out broken, barely above a whisper. He couldn't even remember the last time he'd called someone by their name with that kind of respect. "Willow." She stood slowly, smoothing her uniform even though it was wrinkled and stained, meeting death with dignity. It was more grace than he'd ever shown anyone. Ransom tried to find words, tried to organize the chaos in his head into something coherent. But everything he'd built his life on, every certainty, every belief, every piece of armor he'd worn, had been stripped away in that hospital conference room. So he did the only thing left. He dropped to his knees on the cold concrete floor. The sound echoed in the small room. Ransom Kane, a man whose name made senators nervous and whose reputation had built an empire on fear, knelt before a maid and felt his world collapse into the truth he'd been too blind to see. "I trusted the titles," he whispered, and his voice cracked like breaking glass. "The degrees, the credentials, the $1,000,000 scans, and the doctors who charged more per hour than most people make in a month." Tears were running down his face now, cutting through the exhaustion, and the blood still dried on his collar, tracing the lines of his tattoos. "I trusted the money. I thought if I spent enough, threatened enough, demanded enough, I could buy my son's cure." Willow's own tears started falling, silent and steady. "But you!" Ransom looked up at her, this young woman he'd almost had killed, this stranger who'd saved his son. You trusted the boy. You saw him, really saw him, not his diagnosis or his scans or his case file. Just him. Just Marco. His voice broke completely. And I almost killed you for it. God forgive me, I almost killed you for saving him. Mr. Kane! I'm so sorry. The words tore out of him. I'm so sorry, Willow. You risked everything. Your job, your father, your life. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and you did it anyway because you saw a child suffering and you couldn't walk away. He pressed his hands against his face, his shoulders shaking. While the people I paid, the people I trusted, they kept him broken. For 3 years they knew. They knew, and they let him suffer because I was a reliable source of income. Willow knelt down slowly, meeting him at eye level on that concrete floor. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. I didn't do it for money or recognition. I did it because Marco needed someone to see him. To really see him. And because my grandmother taught me that sometimes the smallest act of faith can move mountains. Your grandmother was wiser than every specialist I ever hired. Ransom's laugh was wet, broken. The miracle didn't come from my billions. It came from your willing hands, your faithful heart, your courage. He met her eyes, and there was no pride left in him, no armor, just a broken father facing the woman who'd saved his son. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve your mercy, but I'm begging you for it anyway. Willow reached out and did something no one had dared to do in 20 years. She touched Ransom Kane's shoulder, that simple gesture of comfort, and whispered, You already have it. And in that basement room, in the cold gray light before dawn, saw the Mafia boss who'd built an empire on fear finally learned what grace looked like. It looked like a maid with rough hands and a grandmother's wisdom, offering forgiveness he'd never earned. It looked like mercy he didn't deserve. It looked like love. They walked through the mansion together in silence, an impossible pairing that would have seemed absurd 24 hours ago. Ransom Kane, his suit still wrinkled and blood-stained, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and something like rebirth. Willow Maeve, her uniform dirty, her feet bare on the cold marble, walking beside a man who'd almost had her killed. The sun was rising properly now, golden light streaming through the tall windows, catching dust motes in the air and turning them into something almost holy. The mansion felt different, lighter somehow. Like a weight had been lifted that nobody had realized was there. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say that hadn't been said on that concrete floor. Ransom had made calls during the elevator ride up, to Victor, to the hospital, to his lawyers. Short, clipped orders that dismantled the disposal arrangements and started building something else. Something that looked like justice. Dr. Vasquez and her team would face consequences. The files would be made public. Marco's case would be reviewed by independent specialists. But first, Ransom needed to see his son. They reached the private medical suite that had been set up in the east wing. Through the door's window, Ransom could see Marco sitting on the edge of the bed, his legs dangling over the side. Dr. Sarah, the physical therapist, stood nearby with a walker, but she wasn't pushing, she was just watching, her hand over her mouth. Marco was flexing his ankles, slowly, carefully, like he was learning a new language. Point and flex. Point and flex. His face was scrunched up in concentration, his tongue poking out the corner of his mouth the way it did when he was working on chess problems. Ransom pushed the door open. Marco's head snapped up. His eyes went wide when he saw Willow, and something lit up in his face that Ransom had never seen before. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Willow. Marco's voice cracked on her name, before anyone could stop him. Before the doctors could caution him about taking it slow, before physical therapists could recommend proper support, Marco slid off the bed. His legs buckled immediately. 8 years of atrophied muscles couldn't support his weight. But instead of falling, he caught himself, his feet flat on the ground, his legs trembling but holding. He took one step, wobbly, uncertain, his arms windmilling for balance. Dr. Sarah moved forward instinctively, but Ransom held up a hand, stopping her. Marco took another step, then another. His movements were uncoordinated, unpracticed, the gait of someone learning to walk at 8 years old. But he was walking, actually walking. His face was fierce with determination, sweat beading on his forehead, his small hands clenched into fists. 4 steps, 5, 6. Then his legs gave out and he stumbled forward, and Willow was there, catching him, dropping to her knees and wrapping her arms around him as he clung to her, like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. "Thank you." Marco's voice was muffled against her shoulder, thick with tears and laughter and disbelief. "Thank you, thank you, thank you!" Willow was crying too, her hands cradling the back of his head, rocking him gently. "You did it, Marco. You did it. I knew you could." "My legs work." He pulled back to look at her face, his own face wet with tears, grinning so wide it looked like it might split his face in half. "Willow, my legs actually work." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Then Marco turned his head and saw his father. Ransom was standing in the doorway, utterly still, tears streaming down his face unchecked. He looked like a man witnessing something he'd stopped believing in years ago. Resurrection. Redemption. A miracle he'd spent 8 years and $300 million searching for. Given freely by a woman who had nothing. Marco reached out one hand toward him. "Dad!" Ransom crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside them, his hands hovering over Marco like he was afraid to touch him, afraid this moment might shatter if he made contact. But Marco wasn't afraid. He pressed his small palm flat against his father's chest, right over his heart, and held it there. The gesture Willow had taught him, safe. "Dad," Marco said again, his voice rough but clear, steady with a certainty that broke something in Ransom's chest. "I can hear your heart. It's beating really fast." That did it. Ransom Kane finally broke. He pulled his son into his arms and held him close, held him like he should have been holding him for 8 years, and let out a sound that was half sob, half prayer. 8 years of guilt and rage and helplessness came pouring out in great, shuddering gasps. He buried his face in Marco's hair and cried like he hadn't cried since the day his wife left, since the day he'd first seen that wheelchair, since the day he'd realized all his power meant nothing. "I'm sorry," he choked out between sobs. "I'm so sorry, Marco. I should have seen it. I should have known. I should have—" "It's okay, Dad." Marco's small arms wrapped around his father's neck. "It's okay. I can walk now. We're okay." Ransom held his son and wept, and slowly became aware of another presence. He looked up through blurred vision and saw Willow standing a few feet away, her hand pressed against her own chest, tears streaming down her face, giving them this moment. She'd done this impossible, beautiful, miraculous thing. She'd taken a risk that could have cost her everything and given him back his son. Given Marco back his life. Given them both a second chance they hadn't earned but desperately needed. "Thank you." Ransom's voice was wrecked, broken, but he meant it with every fiber of his being. "Thank you, Willow, for seeing him, for trusting him, for having the courage I didn't have." Willow smiled through her tears, and it was the same smile she'd given Marco that first day with the chess piece. Gentle, kind, full of a grace that Ransom was only beginning to understand. "He was always worth saving," she said softly. "You both were." And in that sun-filled room, with his son in his arms and the woman who'd saved them both standing witness, Ransom Kane finally understood what his grandmother had tried to teach him before the Empire, and the violence and the money had consumed everything. Some things can't be bought. Some miracles require nothing more than willing hands and a faithful heart. Some families are redeemed not by power but by love, and sometimes the most valuable person in the room is the one everyone else overlooked. Marco shifted in his father's arms and looked at Willow with serious eyes. "Will you stay? Please? I still need to learn how to walk properly, and someone has to beat me at chess." Willow looked at Ransom, a question in her eyes. Ransom nodded, unable to speak, and held out his hand to her. She took it. And the Mafia boss's family, broken and scattered and lost, finally became whole. Thank you so much for watching this story. If this video touched your heart even a little, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps me keep creating stories that inspire, heal, and remind us that kindness still exists in this world.